Beautiful, sunny, rainy, splashy kind of day it is out there. Kind of icy too. Welcome everybody to meeting 147 of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we are continuing our study of the impacts of Canada's regulatory structure on small business. Today we have with us from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Ryan Greer, Senior Director, Transportation and Infrastructure Policy. Welcome, sir. And from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Laura Jones, Executive Vice President, and Corrine Pullman, Senior Vice President, National Affairs and Partnerships. We're going to get started with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. You have up to 7 minutes to present to us, sir.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting the Canadian Chamber to take part in your study on the impacts of Canada's regulatory structure on small businesses. Challenges with Canada's regulatory frameworks have long been a key issue for a large portion of our network of over 200,000 members, which are small companies. While the myriad of government rules and regulations that permeate nearly all business activity in Canada all exist for a reason, whether it be maintaining market integrity, environmental safety, or consumer protections, they also create a costly and uncertain environment to start or grow a business. This is especially true for small companies that lack the specialized and dedicated compliance resources of larger firms. For a small business owner, every hour spent on administrative and compliance activities has huge opportunity costs. It is one less hour spent on productive work such as acquiring new customers, improving a product or service, or training their employees. Last May, the Canadian Chamber published a report, Death by 130,000 Cuts, which takes its name from the over 130,000 federal requirements that impose an administrative burden on business. In it, we made several recommendations about how the government can improve Canada's regulatory competitiveness. I believe a copy of that should have been distributed to the members beforehand. Its message to the government is that in addition to reducing red tape, we need to tackle the root causes of our regulatory problems. Cumulative burden is one symptom of poor regulatory processes. Without changes to how departments and agencies develop regulations, any of the gains that we might see from regulatory and red tape efficiency exercises will continue to be erased. To reduce the cumulative burden that disproportionately affects small companies, we would like to see Treasury Board expand the one-for-one rule so that in addition to administrative requirements resulting from regulations, that it also applies to requirements from legislation, departmental guidelines, and other policies. Filling in this gap would certainly help control the overall growth in red tape. The Chamber would also recommend that the government amend the current one-for-one rule and establish a temporary two-for-one rule to remove 2 administrative requirements for every one that is introduced. This is not a radical idea. As we know, BC had tremendous success with this approach in the early 2000s, which resulted in a 36% reduction in regulatory requirements between 2001 and 2004. And the government of Manitoba and our neighbors to the south in the U.S. are using their own versions of a two-for-one rule right now. I understand this study is also looking at how to support small companies through international regulatory alignment. Removing non-tariff trade barriers is important for small firms, and the Chamber has been an active participant in the Canada-U.S. Regulatory Cooperation Council and the nascent discussions around regulatory cooperation through CETA. However, for most small businesses, this is putting the cart way before the horse. We need to find a way to address the tyranny of small regulatory differences that exist between provinces here in Canada. They are a serious deterrent for a small company considering expansion within this country, and for many of them, Canadian expansion is a precursor to trying to do business internationally. The new Canadian Free Trade Agreement is a definite improvement on the old agreement on internal trade, but still has its shortcomings, and the regulatory reconciliation mechanism is the most important one. The CFTA promises future negotiation on regulatory alignment when what is needed now is big, bold commitments to mutual recognition. While we appreciate that many of the decisions regarding these differences are within the purview of the provinces, who all have distinct interests, the federal government holds many carrots and many sticks to help advance this work. It cannot be overstated how important legitimate progress on interprovincial regulatory barriers is to addressing the issues being considered in this study. In our report, we recommended that all regulators should be given economic competitiveness and innovation considerations in their mandates. Protection and prosperity are not an either-or proposition, yet many regulators are not achieving a balance between the two in their decision-making because they are not required to do so. We were pleased when November's fall economic statement said the government would explore making regulatory efficiency and economic growth a permanent part of regulator mandates. The Chamber would very strongly encourage the House to take up and pass legislation in this regard as soon as possible. For small firms, this could be more important than the existing Treasury Board small business lens. If implemented correctly, it will encourage departments and agencies to be more proportionate in their regulatory actions and ensure that growth is an economic outcome that all regulators are working towards. The Fall Economic Statement also responded to another of our recommendations and said that the government would establish an external advisory committee on regulatory competitiveness. In addition to ensuring that the committee has sufficient small business representation, we'd recommend building accountability into its structure. This can be done by adopting a comply or explain approach to the committee's work. This would mean that the government would either need to implement the committee's recommendations or, at the very least, publicly explain why they will not. And lastly, relevant to this study, we agree with the need to make our regulatory frameworks more nimble. This is especially important for innovative small firms. The traditional command and control, regulate and forget models are not sufficient for today's rapidly changing markets and technologies. We need more iterative, outcome, risk-based regulatory approaches. We are supportive of the commitment to create a Center for Regulatory Innovation that was in the Fall Economic Statement. Again, implementation will be critical. This initiative cannot be designed by civil servants for civil servants. It needs to be set up with the input of small innovative firms that are currently bumping up against our antiquated regulatory frameworks. Many of the government programs and pilot projects that are established to support innovative businesses tend to be more focused on minimizing or eliminating risk to departments than the needs of companies. Think SR&ED, the Building Canada Innovation Program, and many others this committee is familiar with. Departments do not do well with risk-based approaches and layer in all kinds of bureaucracy as a security blanket that can make these programs inaccessible or more trouble than they are worth for many small companies. I'll wrap up with one final comment. Looking back, there have been many whole-of-government and regulator-specific efforts to improve the regulatory environment for small, medium, and large companies in Canada. Despite some of their successes, there has been a continued growth in the complexity, inconsistency, and unpredictability of Canada's regulatory environment. This is a self-imposed barrier to growth, and we, government, businesses, and all other stakeholders need to be more bold and ambitious if we want to reverse this trend. Doing so would have tremendous long-term economic benefits for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. Laura Jones.
Thank you very much. We want to start by thanking the committee for inviting us to present today. We appreciate the opportunity to share the perspective of small business on the impact on Canada's regulatory structure. Regulation is amongst the most important issues that we hear about from our 110,000 small business members across Canada. There's much about Canada's regulatory structure that works well. Important government rules are in place to allow for the exchange of goods and services and to ensure high outcomes in the areas of health, safety, and environmental protection. But we all know that regulation is not free. It takes time and money to comply with government rules, which is why we have to guard against over-regulation, or what we call red tape. Excessive regulation leads to a host of bad consequences, not just for small business, but for society. Some of these consequences include things like reduced incomes, higher prices, less entrepreneurship, and fewer jobs. And there are some interesting new studies now connecting excessive regulating with increased income inequality and poverty. Certainly, any strategy to support the middle class in this country must have a strong focus on keeping government rules manageable. So how much red tape is there in Canada? Well, small businesses will tell you they think roughly 30% of the regulatory burden can be reduced without undermining the legitimate objectives of regulating. I think this may be a conservative estimate when you look at what happened in the province of British Columbia. Ryan mentioned the 36% reduction between 2001 and 2004. Even more impressive, they've continued to make gains since then with their one in, one out policy, and they currently have cut their rules roughly in half, a 49% reduction relative to 2001 levels, which is probably the most successful model of regulatory reform that exists in North America. And they've done that while maintaining high levels of health, safety, and environmental protection. I think that's important to say. So our first point is that we believe there is room to reduce regulatory requirements in Canada, and our advice would be to set a reduction target of 25% to be accomplished in 3 years. I think this is a very conservative estimate of what can be reduced. As part of meeting this target, it will be critically important to engage and empower regulators to be part of the solution. While the private sector and business associations can help identify things to fix, regulators across the system are also in an excellent position to help with this while preserving important rules. And I think that's one of the most important lessons, actually, that comes from what happened in British Columbia. This brings us to our second main point about the regulatory structure in Canada. We don't yet have enough accountability. For example, there are no comprehensive measures available of the total number of federal regulatory requirements. Ryan mentioned 130,000. That doesn't cover all government departments and agencies, and certainly doesn't cover all of the requirements coming from even from the departments and agencies that it does apply to. So this means that even if we all agreed that the total regulatory burden should, as we recommend, be reduced by 25%, we would have no way of monitoring this. And when it comes to things like other ways government affects our lives, like taxation and spending, we have lots of reporting and accountability. When it comes to regulatory measurement and accountability, we have very, very little. I'll now turn things over to my colleague, Corinne, who will walk you through some of the data we have from small businesses that support our recommendations.
Thanks. So I'll refer you to the slides that are in front of you. This is slide 3, which shows that the smallest businesses actually pay the largest per employee cost of regulation. From a small business perspective, the cost of regulation is actually regressive and puts the smallest businesses at the biggest disadvantage because they don't benefit from the economies of scale of larger businesses would. Slide 4 shows the same data, but now it's compared to U.S. businesses. Now, U.S. businesses have lower per employee costs for most business sizes. This again underscores our main point that there's probably still room to reduce the regulatory burden. But the impacts really go far beyond costs. When asked, small businesses will tell you that the excessive regulations have a significant impact on their productivity, as you can see here. Perhaps more worrying, as you can see on the slide, is that close to half of business owners report that they would discourage their kids from going into business as a result of the regulatory burden that now exists in this country. And given the demographic trends we're facing, this should not be ignored. So in terms of the types of federal irritants that are of greatest burden to small businesses, this slide here gives you a very high-level overview of the top concerns of small business owners. Tax-related regulations and paperwork really dominate the top 3, as basically all businesses have to deal with CRA. Also significant, though, for many small businesses dealing with records of employment, or ROEs, and Statistics Canada. So as far as solutions go, as you can see here, small businesses are really strong supporters of just about anything the government might try to do to reduce red tape. We recommend all of the things you see listed here, some of which have already been addressed to some degree or have started to be addressed, and we'd be happy to discuss any of these points further. For example, Canada was the first country in the world to pass one-for-one legislation, and it did this with all-party support. Canada is actually now seen as a world leader in this particular area, and we think that still more can be done. For example, as Ryan also pointed out, the one-for-one legislation should be expanded to include more than just regulations, but to other types of requirements found in legislation and policies and guidelines. Furthermore, we recognize that the government recently announced some new regulatory modernization initiatives as part of the federal economic statement, including establishing an external advisory committee, which is also listed here as one of the things our members think is important. All these are a very good start and only the beginning, but small businesses really need governments to continue to do more. As you can see here, what small businesses are looking for is for governments to simplify, reduce, and clearly communicate regulations to help them better comply. They also want to see improvements in government customer service, which could include things like providing examples of what constitutes compliance. These types of initiatives, it isn't always just about the regulations, it's often about how those regulations are communicated and what it is that businesses need to do in order to comply. These are a list of comments from business owners that what they would do had they had more time and were spending less time on red tape. This actually came from a poll we did just 2 weeks ago during our annual Red Tape Awareness Week, and we hope some of these ideas will inspire you to continue paying attention to this important policy area. Finally, I will leave this slide up as this is our main recommendations that Laura went through at the beginning on our last slide, and we'd like to thank you for your attention, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We didn't have enough PowerPoint slides for everybody, so they will be sent to your offices via email. Thank you very much. We're going to jump right into questions with Mr. Longfield. You have 7 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for coming. This has been something that's been on my mind for many, many years, both as a small business owner and also president of the Chamber of Commerce in Guelph, and working with the Canadian Chamber, the Ontario Chamber, and now being in a position where I'm on this side of the table to say, how can we work together? Maybe I could start with Mr. Greer on how the government engages businesses through your network. This maybe we'll go to both witnesses, but some businesses say we're surveyed to death, but on the other hand, we need to know where are the worst areas in terms of cost to business. We need regulations in order to protect the safety and protect consumers in Canada, but there are some regulations that cost a lot of money and could be argued that the climb isn't worth the slide. Do you have any specific examples of which regulations are costing business, or which are the greatest irritants to business?
I mean, I think a good place to start, and I imagine the CFIB will echo this, is the Canada Revenue Agency. Amongst the network, as you'll know, of members of Chambers of Commerce, every year they get together and propose policy resolutions and amend and debate on these. And that's what actually helps set the policy of the Canadian Chamber. So some 400 Chambers of Commerce have the ability to submit and propose resolutions through this process. And one of the most common occurring is those built around CRA processes. There are multiple that are usually come up every year. The CRA, I think, has made some efforts to continue to try to address some of those, but nevertheless, it remains one of the biggest pain points, I think, for small companies. But I think if you venture into almost any department, you'll find sort of examples from companies that are most directly affected by those regulatory regimes for problematic or maybe just regulations that haven't been reviewed to modernize their compliance activities, to ask the question if the regulations themselves are more relevant. But I think CRA is a good place to start, but you can go into almost any regulating department or agency and find sort of a host of examples from our members.
And Ms. Jones or Ms. Pullman?
Well, Corinne may give you some more specific examples, but I want to make a different point with respect to this. One of the challenges and one of the reasons that I think regulatory reform initiatives fail often, and history is littered with failure, not just here, but in many developed countries, is that it's very tempting to say, well, give me your list of top 10 irritants. And don't get me wrong, I think that's an important part of the solution, and we can give you a list of 100 irritants to address. But the challenge for groups like ours is we'll come forward with those irritants, and we have hardworking, dedicated people who get to work to solve those particular problems. And in the meantime, across the rest of the system, new rules continue to pile up. In fact, I ran into someone from the big business at the airport who was saying exactly the same thing as we're saying with respect to that. So I think we really need to change the architecture so that identifying those irritants is actually a winning formula for businesses on the other side to say, yes, we see that there is reduction. And that requires a reduction target. 2 for 1 is a very good approach, and then followed by a 1 for 1 strategy. And so we need that in place. And then at the same time, when we identify these irritants, we'll actually make some progress, and you'll see the heads nodding on our side of the table that, yes, the load is getting lighter.
So thank you both. The Treasury Board's recently done a consultation process, and they're looking at how do we streamline, how do we introduce innovation into our regulatory processes. One of the comments that I've heard from that consultation process was getting the cost from actual businesses was a difficult thing to draw out. The businesses will always say, yeah, we don't like red tape, we don't like the government being involved in our business, we don't want to spend our time doing government paperwork. But getting the cost of that discussion forward is a difficult thing. It sounds like we're talking about, right now we're trying to simplify what we have, but as you just said, we're also trying to engage businesses earlier in the process as regulations are coming forward. Is that something that we need to consider in our report going back to government?
Want to go first?
Sure. First, just quickly to echo what Laura said, think of the specific problematic regulatory measure as the symptom, and it's good to treat the symptom, it's good to manage the symptom, but if you don't tackle the underlying problem, there's just going to be other symptoms to deal with in the future. For many businesses, especially small companies, it's hard to calculate the cost, the opportunity cost, what does it cost me to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a week on these particular measures? I'm doing different things at the other time. These aren't large companies that can perhaps, bring in a auditing firm or some other consultant to exactly break down what the cost is to them. And then to your question on engaging earlier in, I think there's also some work that needs to be done around rebuilding business confidence in some of those cost-benefit analyses that happen at the front end. Too often, there's a proposal from a department, they've got a very strong idea of what they would like to do, and the cost-benefit seems to be built around how to justify that decision rather than to try to get an honest accounting between business and other stakeholders as to what the actual cost will be, whether it's worth it, whether the underlying assumptions around the social and long-term other benefits are worth it. And so, one, it's difficult to calculate, what those costs are, but two, there needs to be sort of a closer relationship on the front end to actually determine what the real costs are, not just those that maybe come from some folks who haven't had experience in the industry themselves.
So I'm running out of time, but the cost-benefit analysis is one that I think that we'll see throughout this study, that getting the actual numbers is going to be something we're going to be looking for.
Yeah, but I would caution, I think cost benefit has a very important place in regulatory reform, particularly with respect to challenging new regulations that are coming on the books. But with respect to the problem of death by 1,000 small paper cuts, it doesn't do a great job of capturing those things, which is why we recommend a simple, comprehensive measure that doesn't impose a lot of burden on businesses. And often, for whatever reason, that seems to be a challenge for governments to understand why that's so important to have an aggregate, comprehensive, simple count kind of measure to complement the cost benefit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I have the luxury of having the French version of the slide, which we haven't been able to pass out. But I'm just noticing the dates of a lot of your surveys are up to date. They're 2017. However, on page 9, it's actually 2008. Is that correct? Correct. Would you have a more up to date that you can submit?
Yes,
a lot has happened since 2008.
We can easily ask that question again. The reason that question is not more current is we had asked it several times in the past, pre-2008, and the results were very, very stable. So we feel confident that reflects the small business perspective. But we can easily ask that again and get you fresh data.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Albus, you have 7 minutes.
Are we putting more red tape on the CFIB?
Oh, I was just asking if they had a more up-to-date survey, that's all.
More requirements. Anyway, thank you all for being here today. I'd like to focus on regulatory red tape from the perspective of proportionality as well as opportunity costs. But before we go there, I'd just like to ask, first of all, Mr. Greer, the national carbon tax that the federal Liberal government has imposed upon many provinces and territories, I remember during Bill C-74, that the Implementation Act for it, there was about 300 pages of, and that's just the legislation, not the regulations, saying this is who you charge tax to, this is who you don't charge tax to. If you charge a farmer for purple, you can't charge a farmer for purple gas, but you can charge a farmer for regular gas, and on and on and on it goes. Whether we're talking flying between Ontario and a province, or pardon me, a territory like Nunavut, you would have it. But in British Columbia, obviously, they don't charge a carbon tax on jet fuel. So would you please just maybe explain what impacts that would have on many of your members, particularly the small ones that are proportionately have to comply, where this is the most challenging?
Sure. Thanks for the question. First, just to set aside carbon pricing for one moment, the Chamber has long advocated and will be advocating this year for comprehensive tax reform because for our current tax system is so incredibly complex. It is a large driver of what is causing problems for businesses of all size, including our small ones. On carbon pricing, the Chamber has actually been on the record since 2011 in favor of carbon pricing as an effective way to reduce emissions. But the promise of that was always that there would be regulatory reductions associated with that. So one of the things we've been watching and trying to understand where the carbon pricing debate is going is, will small business members particularly see a reduction in regulatory requirements so that it will offset what some of those costs may be? And right now we're not seeing that. We're seeing carbon pricing plus a clean fuel standard plus new methane regs. So it's sort of a pricing plus regulations as opposed to a pricing minus. And in the view of our members, the benefit of a tax will have been that it would be more efficient than those other regulatory approaches. But right now we're sort of getting the worst of both worlds as it is. So any driver of costs for our members this year and going forward will be a challenge for them.
So do you see, though, for a small person or small business that is trying to service multiple different types of clientele and different classes of, that they're going to be subject to a whole bunch of regulatory red tape where they're going to have to, open up a binder to say where they apply the tax and where they don't?
Even from a pure cost perspective, so even if there's a rebate for small businesses based on carbon pricing, the clean fuel standard is going to increase transportation costs. So the regulatory side, transportation costs across Canada. So even for a low emitting small business, almost all of them are relying on the transportation system in one way or another and are going to have their costs increase through that route, through the clean fuel standard. So certainly it's something we're watching and our small business members are watching closely. Do
you feel that not just the price, because that's a different question here, but the regulatory requirements may also push some activities, just because there's increased costs, those have to be passed on to someone, where you may see people deciding to take a flight from the United States rather than from Canada. So again, carbon leakage, but by regulatory means. Do you think that that's an issue?
Certainly it's one risk, and we will be strongly encouraging the government, along with its carbon pricing regime that is proposing, to show us how regulatory burden will be reduced to offset some of those tax costs. So it's certainly something we'll be watching for and pushing.
Okay. I'd like to go to the CFIB. Ms. Jones, Ms. Pullman, thank you for your presentation and your ongoing work on this. Another area that we've seen a lot of resentment from the small business community is obviously the changes to the Income Tax Act, particularly to Canadian-controlled private corporations. Again, these rules were implemented with very little consultation and with a sense that they were, many small businesses told me that they felt the federal government was out to get them. Now, this is the first year that we've had with these new rules in place. Are your members find it more complicated to be able to comply from a small, again, small businesses face the higher proportionality of terms of reporting requirements? What are your members saying?
Yeah, so in particular, it's the tax on split income changes that have had the biggest impact in terms of regulatory burden. There's now sort of two levels of tests you have to go through in order to prove whether a family member is working in your business. So there is now a bright line test you have to go through first, and if you pass that, then you're good. But if you don't pass that, you have to go through a reasonableness test, which has always kind of been there, but the addition is now this bright line test, which pretty much everybody who employs family members has to figure out a way to be able to prove to CRA whether it's now producing timesheets because your spouse is working at the business, that they're actually working in the business legitimately. Those are the types of paperwork burden that's been increased as a result of the tax on split income changes. The actual tax itself may not have as broad an impact, but it's the extra paperwork that's really been adding to the costs of small businesses when it comes to
So the
those
extra
changes.
paperwork, because again, to apply for those, for that particular program, you have to submit paperwork showing that you made. So do you think there are going to be some cases where people just don't have the paperwork that they could legitimately apply for it, but will choose not to just because of the regulatory burden that goes along with that?
There's always that potential, for sure. And I think our bigger fear is whether our members even know that what type of paperwork is going to be required. We're trying to work with CRA right now to get that information out as broadly as possible, but I don't think we're really going to know until about 2 years down the road once audits start to happen of those businesses. And we're seeing whether or not the materials they're producing are being, used by CRA as legitimate enough. So I think it's going to take a few years to really understand the repercussions of this and how it's going to play out in the real world.
Okay, so just in your assessment, I'll ask Mr. Greer and CFIB the same question. Do you feel that the regulatory burden, because of things like a national carbon tax, as well as these small business changes, have negatively impacted your members from a red tape perspective?
Yes, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why the Income Tax Act is currently not included as one of the areas that comes under the one-for-one rule, or it's not included as part of the count. And both of these measures, as far as I understand, are under the Income Tax Act more than anything else. So yes, it continues to grow, but there's no control over that particular act in terms of its impact
Very
on
briefly,
small
please.
business.
I would just add, I mean, I think this goes to something that Laura said, which is really important, is there are specific initiatives, and there will always be regulatory and legislative initiatives that, by virtue of their necessity, will increase red tape or regulatory burden. But having no complete, accurate measure of what that burden is and being able to track fully where we're at and how we can reduce those numbers makes it difficult, because it gets better sometimes, it gets worse sometimes. We don't have a complete picture of how bad it actually is.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Massey, you have 7 minutes.
Chair, and thank you. Good presentations as well and good documents. First, a simple question. Why do we need regulations?
I think, as I alluded to in my remarks, there's any number of reasons, many of which benefit all Canadians and businesses alike, which is market integrity, health, safety, protections.
Yeah, I would echo that, but I think there are a number of really important regulations. In fact, small businesses would say that about 70% of the rules that we have are necessary, and they have no issue paying taxes and filling out the forms to pay their taxes, for example. But when the forms get overly complex, or the rules around paying taxes get cumbersome for no good reason, that's where you start to have the challenge.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the general thought, though, is that there's not an opposition to have regulations, but the problem is that we need enforcement, because some people choose not to follow the law and fair practices, and so there has to be some enforcement of, for health, safety, labor laws, employment, and documents for people, say, for example, for employment insurance and other things like that, is what it comes in place. So with that, there's in the document you have here, there's $36 billion in cost. Where did that number come from? What's the background for the 36 annual billion, and where did you get that from?
So that comes from a survey that we do of our small business members, where we ask them the time it takes to comply, the time they spend, the time their staff spend, the money they spend on things like accountants in order to comply with the rules. So it's an estimate of the cost of regulation to Canadian business. So that's not Canadians overall, that's Canadian businesses of all sizes. I would say it's a basement floor, very conservative estimate of the cost. Anytime we had to make an assumption, we made a conservative assumption, and there are things that are not included in our estimate.
Is that methodology created by yourselves, or is that independent from a university or an institution, or?
No, that methodology was created in-house at CFIB with the help of our chief economist.
Because the first thing that you have some really good recommendations that line down there, and one of the first one is measure the regulatory burden. So where do we need to? And I think that's a really good point. Like, where do because if you're going to maybe get the low-hanging fruit or whatever, it always seems this way. But anyway, where do we need to measure better than the current what we have in front of us? And I know that Chamber has a good document here too, where they mentioned the 2015 report as well too. So we have some numbers floating around there.
Yeah.
But is it kind of just scattered or not consistent?
Yeah, I would say scattered, not consistent, and not comprehensive enough. And I would include our measure in that, not comprehensive enough. I mean, it's an attempt to put a price on it, but I think, and there are some good cost benefit that have been done on specific regulations. But what we need is a measure of everything that exists in the system, and that doesn't exist. And I would suggest that it be a simple measure, not a perfect measure. It won't tell you everything you need to know, but that's why we're suggesting a regulatory requirement measure.
So you're kind of looking for like an annual benchmark that we could look at every year and maybe have it in different categories and so forth, and measure how we're getting along. Is that correct? Something
like the province of Manitoba is now kind of state of the art with respect to this kind of measurement. British Columbia has measures where they're looking at regulatory requirements. They can tell you how many they have by department, and whether you can look and see whether they've gone up or down in any given year. So like with taxes, we can say, well, if we've got an increase in the regulatory requirement load in a particular area, what benefits are we getting for that? It may not be a bad thing to increase the load, but we want to be able to ask those challenging questions about what benefits we might be getting.
I think that would be helpful because I know terminology like red tape and regulations, it's like grabbing at clouds. Whereas if we get some really good measurables, and I think it's important that the industries are coming forth to us to say that they'd like to have that measurement stick, so to speak, because then you can really get to maybe more specifics. And I know you have a couple case examples in your documents here, but it would be nice to actually have them even broken out industry specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you used a measure like British Columbia or Manitoba has established, they're different, but they both do the same thing. The biggest message I can leave you with respect to measurement is make it comprehensive and keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it, because what's happened in the past is measurement has been dismissed by, well, we need to do cost and it's too expensive and complicated to do that across the system, so we just won't measure anything. And so to me, that's making the perfect the enemy of the good.
Have any time left?
I have 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's where we get to the 2 for 1 and stuff like that. It's just like, let's just get at her and see, because you get to the point where it's too complicated, you get nothing done. One thing I would ask, though, is that I always remember I was here, and we had a presentation by the Canadian chief economists, and they were complaining about the fact there was government programs, but there's no longer government staff to do those programs, but they were always constantly talking about reducing the public service. So have you looked at what you're asking here in terms of your recommendations, and how would that be supported in terms of the current public service or whatever? Because there's work to be done in here. Or like when I used to work for Association for Persons with Physical Disabilities, I could show that by investing in my program, I actually lowered government costs by reducing people on ODSP and other types of disability support, Canada Disability Pension Plan, and so forth. But at any rate, do you feel that if there was an injection into that, we could actually reduce costs? I'll leave that to you to maybe finish off.
I feel like the benefits you would get from this far outweigh the costs. And when you look at what's happened at the provincial level, again, by not making the perfect the enemy of the good, if a province like British Columbia or Manitoba can do a very good job, what we would say is a very good job of it, certainly we feel that the federal government can do it. And they didn't create huge armies of people, huge teams to execute this.
Yeah, I would just add that the federal government has tremendous resources. Many departments and agencies have incredibly large staff that are focused on new regulatory initiatives, whether it's the minister or the government has declared some priority that they're now working on, but actually taking some of those taking a step back and saying, before we regulate in this new area, if this isn't some pressing health or environmental emergency, why don't we use that staff to actually take account for what we do have in the stock, what's working, what isn't working, what needs to be modernized. So we think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to actually just spend some time, like you said, looking back at what exists before sort of branching out and just continually adding new regulations on top of it.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Mr. Bayless. You have 7 minutes.
Could I ask you to go back to your slide number 7, please?
Way to go, Frank.
Yeah. The questions about regulations. In this, I see 2 types of issues. One, I think, Mr. Greer, you talked about the challenges is that we're in a rapidly changing environment. So regulations constantly have to be updated. So if we have like a self-driving car, well, we just don't have the regulations for that. So we can complain if the government makes new regulations, but by gosh, it's got to do it because it just doesn't exist. So when I look at this, and I want to have your comments on this, I tease out 2 things. The number 1 issue, which is payroll taxes, there's no innovation there. There's no innovation. Payroll taxes 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today, it's exactly the same. So if we say we're in a rapidly changing environment, that's not impacting the concerns of the top ones, which are all CRA. So payroll taxes, GST, income taxes, and even record of employment, there's no innovation going on there. But then if I drop down to sectors, I notice the first sector I see is environment, which has got tremendous innovation going on, then transport and agriculture. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, as I see this, there's 2 issues about regulations. One is just the burden, which is not changing, static, and one is which is a very dynamic environment. How do you see that, Mr. Greer? And then we'll move on to...
I mean, first, I think departments and regulators generally don't do well with outcome or risk-based regulation. They like prescriptive, command and control. You'll prescribe how somebody will meet the outcome, and I think payroll CRA type taxes are an exact example of that, especially when it comes to money issues. where some departments who are trying to keep up with evolving technology or markets are having some success is by understanding that they need to accept more risk-based regulations, so where you actually just focus on the highest areas of potential non-compliance.
So that's where you got an innovative environment. Something's new, something's changing. I got to balance risk with regulation, risk with regulation.
Exactly.
Right,
And I would just add the need for more outcome-based regulation as well. Set a standard, but let industry figure out a way to get there. And there's examples of this. Fuel efficiency would be one where there has been success, and different manufacturers will take different routes to get there. However, those tend to be the exceptions rather than the rule, which is very prescriptive requirements from most regulators, which prescribe a very clear path. We have some of our members in the oil and gas sector who talk about the long path to implementing a new piece of equipment in one of their operations. And even if it's more efficient and it's more environmentally friendly and it's safer, it's such a long path to get there that often they'll delay the investment or it won't happen.
Because it's got to go through so much regulation.
So much regulation.
Okay, so
as soon as they implement that,
Yeah.
it's the race to second place. Every
Yeah.
every other service will follow them immediately
So
afterwards.
that's the battle with the regulator versus balancing risk reward. Now, if I come to the question of, say, payroll taxes, QPP, CPP, EI, there's no risk reward, is there? There's no, like, just fill in the form. It's just a lot of forms. So can we talk a little bit? Now, these are your slides.
Yeah.
We can't sit here and talk, we got to balance risk reward. We don't have to balance any risk reward on the top four. It's just pure out fill in the forms. So have you looked, or is there any arguments about, like, we're halfway in there of using technology just to simplify
Yeah.
CRA's interaction, or is there other
Yes.
things there?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But I can tell you one of the most widely cheered changes that CRA made was changing thresholds on GST and payroll taxes, meaning you don't have to file as often. So depending on how big your
You mean the
payroll
$30,000 going to?
So
the-
annually, you pay annually GST between
so
30
you
and
can file
50.
quarterly or annually and
Correct.
monthly, all that, right?
And by changing those thresholds, that meant a bunch of people didn't have to pay as often during
Tell
a
me
year.
the
So that
thresholds that were
reduces.
changed.
Both GST was changed in about 2007, 2008. I don't think it's been changed since. Payroll taxes was changed around 2014 or 13, somewhere in there. But they hadn't been changed in decades before that.
The
So
filing,
that kind of
the
more
rate of filing that's necessary, right?
correct. So it's about reducing the burden, so you don't have to file as often. So, and with record of employment, they still create 8 million, I believe. The number's around 8 million a year, of which like maybe 1 million are used, right? So every year, every time you separate with an employee, you have to fill out these forms that are still on paper. Like, these are all things that I think all of these, yes, you're right, they are things you have to do if you run a business, but there's ways that we can do them much more efficiently than we can today, and it's just adding to that burden, because this is just federal, then there's provincial.
So let's
municipal.
keep that in mind when we're looking at these two issues, is that there's a number, as Mr. Greer's pointed out, where the government's forced to come in and look for regulations to balance risk and innovation, and then there's just a phenomenal burden, like
Correct.
every month I got to fill this in. Can you make it quarterly or can you make it monthly, depending on how much money I owe the government?
But that's the beauty of having a very simple measure with a constraint in the system, because all of a sudden, it's the regulators themselves that are looking for those opportunities. So instead of us always having to be pounding on the door saying, why don't you increase the threshold and get, or change it to annual instead of quarterly, the regulators themselves start looking for those things and being rewarded for those things. And that starts to change the culture in government.
So let's talk about that then. I'll give you an example. In China, remember 10 years ago they had the tainted milk scandal. A couple people were executed. The head of their regulatory for food and drugs was fired. After that, it got a lot harder, obviously, to get things approved in China, not easier. So that goes to the incentive of the actual regulators. So we sit outside and say, hey, you know what? Why don't you be more effective? Why don't you be more efficient? Why don't you take, when that balance of risk reward, take a little more risk so we can have more innovation? And you know what they say? Why? Why would I do that? Barring, the only thing I've seen here is your concept of 2 for 1 that would mandate them to be, like, you've got to do it. But in terms of saying, I want to change your attitude or your approach, why would they do that?
Well, I think being currently the system rewards regulators for being regulation makers to add to the pile of regulation. That's what you get acknowledged for. That's what you get recognized. I've talked to regulators who say, yeah, when you help get a big reg, that's when you get your, your certification, you get, something nice, a reward, a thank you. And I think what ideally we want to shift to is regulation makers turning into regulation managers, where they are doing a good job of protecting and keeping the important rules, but identifying red tape. And when you look at what happened in British Columbia, I mean, this is a very powerful model. They've cut their rules in half. And they still have high levels of health, safety, environmental outcomes. In fact, in some areas, the outcomes are better.
Out of your surveys, have you seen a change in your? Do you break it out by province? Like, so let's say they've cut it in half. They could have easily cut it in half by taking two regulations and merging them, and saying now it's one. But have your people said that it's gotten
Yes,
better?
they have. And to your point about, two and merging it into one, that's why it's important the measure be simple, comprehensive, and fairly granular, so that it can't be messed with. There's always going to be some games that can be played, but they did a good job of coming up with a good, simple measure that was granular enough that you couldn't play those two-for-one kind of games.
Sorry.
I'm done. Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Leitch.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to follow up on some of the questions that my colleague, Mr. Albus, was asking to you, Mr. Greer. Back in 2015, we had a provincial and a federal election in Alberta, and one of the key themes is that we needed to buy the social license so we could get pipelines built in this country. And part of that social license was a carbon pricing regime. And I see here from the analysts' data that they provided us that since 2014, we've seen 3,000 new regulation, or nearly 3,000 regulations added onto the National Energy Board, and about 2,000 new regulations for Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I was just wondering if you could comment on, does that feel like the social license has been bought in this country, or does that feel like we're just getting the regulation and the pricing all together?
Yeah, I mean, I think if any of us felt like the social license had been bought, that we would be building pipe right now, and we're not. Listen, regulatory problems are very different across all different departments and agencies, but certainly our inability to get oil to Tidewater is one of the biggest regulatory problems in this country that has some of the greatest economic impact. And while we are sympathetic to the challenge of trying to set up a regulator that has the ability to go out and undertake the right amount of consultations with the right impacted communities to do these things, that work needs to be focused. So, the idea that anybody, whether they're impacted by a project or not, could be funded from potentially foreign interests, have an ability to intervene to their heart's desire in a project, that creates challenges.
So are you saying that the new standing test requirements under C-69, like that could open it up to foreign interests interfering in our regulator?
I think that consultation processes in general through the NEB, looking backwards and forwards, have provided an opportunity where instead of focusing on the project, we are instead focusing on the policy. And policy consultations and project consultations are two very different things.
Absolutely.
But over the last several years, they've been merged into one. We think there's room to continue to work on how the NEB is set up and how consultations under new C-69 will work, because we need to find a way to get oil to Tidewater.
Absolutely. One of the things that, I notice in here, obviously provinces have their jurisdiction, they're creating a lot of burden, and that's not the federal government's fault necessarily, but I think it really is incumbent upon the federal government to look for ways that we can harmonize regulations. And I wanted to get your comment on one particular thing that was in the report about the inclusion of upstream emissions in the National Energy Board process, which is traditionally a provincial jurisdiction area. But now that that's been included in the NEB, are we not creating more regulations? And what is the impact of those increased regulations on our energy sector?
Yeah, I think you're right. Regulatory overlap is a problem. And when we have jurisdictions competing to set rules where there was thought to previously be jurisdictional boundaries and they no longer exist, it just creates extra uncertainty for industry, extra layers of burden. So yes, harmonizing, but respecting jurisdictions where they exist is an important way to do that, because it's very challenging for a business. And in your case, you're referring to oil and gas when you're traditionally the Alberta Energy Regulator was tackling upstream emissions, and now that's being considered through the federal lens. It creates uncertainty, certainly.
Can you give any tangible, evidence of these impacts that particular legislation or change has caused?
Well, I mean, our members are heavily engaged and have been heavily engaged in consultations on the legislation and on the changes. I don't have any sort of anecdotes in front of me from directly from our members on that one.
Okay. I also noted in your report that, back in 2009, 2010, Canada was ranked about 9th in terms of global competitiveness on regulations, and now we're ranked at 14th. Can you just elaborate? What has changed? Why have we dropped 5 places?
Yeah, that's the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index. This is a relative measure, so it's difficult to determine without
countries
diving in
change
on
things,
other
yeah.
countries have changed. But the thing that stands out the most to us is, whether Canada's 9th or 14th or somewhere in between, sort of behind a few developed countries, but generally doing okay, is that in the sub-ranking of burden of government regulation, we are in 38th place, which means this is a clear area where if we want to improve our global competitiveness, a clear area that we need to work, and I think why this committee's study is so important, because this is a problem not just from our members in Canada, but from investors and those looking to move in and do business in this country. They're looking and saying it's not as attractive as a business environment as it should be.
Okay. How much time do I have left?
5 seconds.
Okay.
Mr. Sheehan, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you again for the presentation. Nice to see you all again. Obviously, your input is always welcome. Seeing you at a few committees that I attend, so thank you again. The methodology that I was reading about in the back, Appendix B, that you had surveyed the 7,823 small and medium-sized businesses across Canada. Do you also track, if you will, regions of where this data comes from? Say a coastal area, prairies, rural versus urban, northern, border communities, and just not by province, or maybe by province, I don't know. So would you care to elaborate on that methodology?
Yeah, we can do breakouts by province, and where the sample sizes are big enough, we can do some of the other breakouts that you're talking about, coastal regions and other things. For the purposes of the report that we put together, I mean, we've always been very clear that this is not an exact science, putting together the cost of regulation, and this is really an estimate that we put together so that we can get a rough ballpark sense of what these costs might look like, and to track that over time, and also by size of business. You notice most of our breakouts are by size of business. And our study, showing the regressive nature of it, is consistent with OECD work that has also shown a similar, the smallest businesses pay the highest per employee costs. So we feel fairly confident that we're in the, that we have sort of a ballpark sense of these things, and also that the smaller businesses pay higher per employee costs, which makes sense. They don't have the same number of employees to spread the costs over.
Yeah, and with surveys like anything, I used to manage a Enterprise Center, was the small business arm
Yeah.
of the economic development agencies in
Yeah.
Ontario. And the small businesses, rightfully so, they're so busy doing what they do, is they have, they've always said that they have a hard time filling out surveys or whatnot. So sometimes that engagement of sitting with them or talking with them, that kind of stuff, you undertake that sort of efforts as well, do you not?
Yeah, we regularly survey our members, so I would say we're pretty good at it.
Yep.
Having said that, the survey on the cost of regulation, again, we've always been clear that this is an estimate, and it came out of our frustration that governments themselves weren't measuring or doing anything about it. So in an ideal world, we would be doing a simple regulatory count, but it does take some resources, and beyond the resources we have to do that. So that's why we're encouraging governments to measure.
No, and it was good. In one of your slides, you had mentioned about the perception, even the perception of a regulatory burden or burdens preclude some people from starting small businesses, and it just seems like a big mountain to climb. So, I get that I think all the governments need to work together on helping people kind of to get there. But my question I wanted to ask, and I pointed it out earlier, was the Canadian Federation obviously has been at this for a very long time, and they analyze this both federally, provincially, and municipally. As a former councillor, I know that. And, you also not only put the X down, but you also hand out the golden scissors, you know. And I was pleased to see this year that it was Scott Bryson and the Treasury Board that won the golden scissors. So I wanted to applaud you for pointing that out, that you also give people check marks on stuff. Could you explain to us what the golden scissors program is, and how did the Treasury Board receive those golden scissors?
Well, the Golden Scissors Award is something we started a number of years ago in order to recognize good work in the area of cutting red tape. It's not politically all that glamorous, I think, to cut red tape, which is one of the reasons that we don't always see a lot of action in this area. So a number of years ago, we thought, well, it's one thing to point out the problems. Of course, we're good at that, and we like to do that too. But we also need to start rewarding people who are doing good work. So that's really what the Golden Scissors is about, and the regulatory modernization work that's going on. We're pleased with a number of elements of that work, including one of the recommendations that I think everyone here is making, which is to set up an external advisory committee. That's been something we've wanted to see, and some of the other structural pieces that are happening under the Regulatory Modernization Act, including the Omnibus Bill. We're very pleased with that as part of the solution. But we also believe that more needs to be done in this space. Canada is a bit of a leader. I mean, as we're really at the beginning of the work that we need to do, but many developed countries aren't even at the beginning of the beginning. So Canada has been a leader, and I think we should all be really proud, too, of the nonpartisan nature of a lot of this work, the one-for-one passing with all-party support, committees like this looking at the issue. That's something certainly when I go down and talk about this issue in the United States, they are really envious of what we have in this country with respect to that, and the Golden Scissors is part of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Mr. Albus, you got 5 minutes.
Now, I just want to point out for the record that I actually believe Mr. Bayless has raised a very good point, is that I've heard politician after politician always say to business, you need to innovate, and businesses innovate every day. It's government oftentimes that doesn't look at their own processes and asks to see, is there a better way of doing this? And so I just want to just certainly agree with my colleague that that's one area where I think we can do better. Now, moving on to other items, though, Mr. Greer, you had mentioned the Canada Free Trade Agreement, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we would say we need to have a Canadian Free Trade Agreement within Canada. And given the great amount of exemptions in there, really, have your members seen any significant movement in terms of red tape reductions right across the country from that direct agreement?
I mean, our members haven't seen much. A big problem with the CFTA compared to a traditional international trade agreement is the CFTA is not an end state. An international trade agreement spells out what the agreement is, where the CFTA is sort of a promise for new processes and new ways to help reduce the burden. We're a little less concerned about the exemptions. They're there, they're public. We have the ability, other stakeholders have the ability to question governments and say, why is this exemption there, and push them to try to get rid of them. For us, it's actually all the small regulatory differences that aren't talked about in the agreement that are supposed to be negotiated through the Regulatory Reconciliation and Cooperation Table. That table is staffed by, sort of mid-level, senior-level officials from all governments that have a great amount of goodwill. But there's all kinds of loopholes built into that exact process, and that's the only way I guess they could reach an agreement. But there's nothing that mandates regulatory alignment when it's being negotiated. There's nothing that mandates, to go to the example of autonomous vehicles, that new areas of regulation should be aligned. So governments can decide at any time that it's not in their interest to do so. The level of justification that's needed from any jurisdiction to say that they don't want to align is just that they believe it not to be desirable for their jurisdiction. That's a pretty low threshold, and desirable is whatever the minister or the premier thinks it may be at that given time. So in our mind, in many ways, the Regulatory Reconciliation Table has the opportunity to be the linchpin to the deal. It can be like the old agreement on internal trade, which is sort of negotiating this slow, incremental process that isn't meeting anybody's needs. Or it can be an opportunity for there to be a great deal of political will between the Prime Minister and the premiers and senior level officials to actually drive for regulatory alignment. And in our mind, the best way to do that is to commit to mutual recognition. This is what Australia did in the early 90s when Canada decided to go the route of the AIT. There's no reason that in most areas of regulation that the provinces can't say we will agree to recognize the other standards as if they were our own. And then after you've done that, you can take the long work of maybe trying to actually harmonize some of those standards. But there's very few instances in this country where a regulatory standard in one province would not be sufficient in another. I recognize that maybe, yes, a trucking standard to get through the mountains in Alberta won't be different than trucking standards in Saskatchewan, and there will always be legitimate health and safety reasons to have differences. But the current high degree of small differences across almost every area of regulation is unnecessary. And as currently constructed, we're not confident that the CFTA is going to make sufficient progress on those.
Okay, so the process in place has a number of loopholes that allows provinces basically get out of Confederation card when it comes to having joint standards that apply across.
Yes, there's opt-outs built in to say if a province believes it's not in there, it's not desirable, that they can opt out of a joint reconciliation process or even a process to develop common standards in a new area of regulation.
Okay. So C-21 was the Red Tape Reduction Act in the last Parliament, and obviously that bill I strongly supported. Again, there is a difference, though, between what Mr. Massey was referring to in terms of regulations and administrative compliance. Now, the way that the Red Tape Reduction Act works is, at least at the federal level, is that it actually will find out how much time and energy, for example, if it takes X amount by a professional to submit paperwork, it monetizes it, rather than a straight up one-for-one where here's one new piece of paper on the books, we need to take one piece of paper out. Ms. Jones, can you explain that is there a difference between British Columbia's system and the federal system, and also the American system? I'd like to hear about what your views and whether or not which one is the most desirable and effective. I obviously imagine that 2-for-1 sounds better than 1-for-1, but again, if it's just simply where we'll just shrink the font size and say we've reduced the red tape provisions, I don't think that's what business owners are looking for.
We're over time, but you got about I'll give you 30 seconds to answer.
Okay, you're absolutely right that what you measure matters. And so let me give you a very high-level overview. The American 1-for-1 is super narrow. Literally, less than 1% of the rules, the regulations, and actually government rules come from many other sources, are technically eligible for that. So the American 1-for-1, that's not a recipe to follow. I know it gets a lot of attention, but that's not a recipe to follow. Canadian 1-for-1 is significantly better than the American 1-for-1, but still, in our view, too narrow and needs to be expanded. BC's 1-for-1 is the broadest 1-for-1 you have because they literally look at regulatory requirements. So things like if you have to put your name on a piece of paper, that counts as 1. You have to have a safety committee, that counts as 1. So any kind of regulatory requirements, it's quite comprehensive and quite broad. And if you want to go even broader than that, look at Manitoba.
Thank you. We're going to move to Ms. Cesar Chavan.
Yeah, thank you very much to each of our witnesses. So in previous slides, it was mentioned that we should set a target at reducing red tape at 25% over 3 years. And I'm wondering if it should be related to another metric, perhaps regulations that are most costly or take more time, impede growth or exports, or one in which has a correlation between the business size and the cost as opposed to the regression that we saw on this slide. Mm-hmm. Is that the 25%, is that what we should be looking at, or should we look at another metric?
So it's a great question. I think there are already pretty good checks in place when it comes to some of the bigger regulations, although there are some significant other problems that Ryan talked about with respect to confusing policy and project approvals. So in that space, there's some significant challenges. But when it comes to a new big regulation, there's typically a cost benefit is required, and you have a fair amount of study, and so it's not that can't be improved, but when we talk about the 25%, enforcement. We're actually suggesting that you have a simple, very broad measure that can capture the number of requirements on forms, for example, which you wouldn't do with a cost-benefit analysis. And the reason that's important is that when you have a form that's 8 pages long that could be 2 pages long, well, that one example of that may not be that problematic, but when you start multiplying that out across the whole system, then you're getting this kind of death by 130,000 cuts that Ryan is talking about.
So figure 7, and I don't know which slide it is, it's figure 7 in here where you have $6,000 per employee. The cost for a business under 5, would that 8 page, is that bulk of that cost in there? Is that 8 pages? I just want to know what that cost is related to.
For smaller businesses, it would be anything that they might have to comply with. So this would include their records of employment, their tax forms.
And that's measured in time taken to do.
Yeah, time, and then we convert that to a dollar cost. But for smaller businesses, there would be a lot of those, like, little compliance forms or records of employments, tax compliance, StatsCan surveys would be in there.
Of course. And figure 16 talks about the social cost of regulation. You talked about BC, and they cut their regulations in half. They had better outcomes. Did you measure if there were more innovation? So we talked about the innovation side of things. How did that play out in BC, and is there a way to measure that?
It would be a great study to do, and I know there is actually, Mercatus is looking at the impact on, the Mercatus Center in the U.S. is looking at what happened with economic growth and what kind of economic growth was stimulated in BC. So I'm not going to claim this is causation, but I will say that cut the rules in half. The economy turned around from one of the worst performing economies in Canada to one of the best performing economies in Canada. Again, can't claim causation because there were a number of other things going on, but that did happen. And health, environmental, and safety outcomes were maintained at very, very high levels in the province. So I think what that does tell you is you can have fewer rules with high levels of health and safety and a growing economy.
Get that. I'm trying to figure out how the innovation side comes into play, because when innovation starts to spur up, I'm wondering if you have what you were referring to earlier, where you have these regulations popping up. You could cut them in half, but you want to see that innovation. So I think it'll be a good study to see what happened on the innovation side of things. If you cut it in half, do people just, like, I'm not assuming that things just get stagnant, that there is some innovation, but how does that play out in terms of the regulations?
It's a great question, and I think there are two observations. One, unfortunately, the state of the data is so bad that we can't do that kind of study. But my second observation would be that when we ask small business owners, what would you do with the time? If your time were freed up, what would you do with that time? There's a host of things we hear about that, including more time on my business, more time serving my customers, more time planning, so less stress. I'd be spending more time with my family, which I think also makes us more innovative so I think when you hear what business owners say they would do, it certainly speaks that innovation would be part of that package. It's not the only thing they would do with the extra time, but I think it certainly suggests that you would have more of that.
Am I done? Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Massey.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. Back to your conclusions, recommendations, ensure adequate communication of existing and proposed regulation. Any thoughts in terms of, as we move to the digital age, about how new regulations might, I guess, be, worked with that component to be more efficient in terms of even whatever model is picked or whatever we decide? Is there been thoughts about how this is? Because we've all heard the paperless society. We're still waiting for that, but at any rate. As we move to the digital age, though, and more online services happen with the government, there's issues over broadband and access and so forth. But I'll leave it to both of you just to kind of comments about that.
My first thought that comes into my mind is, allow business owners to actually email CRA. Like, that's simple as that, right? I mean, there are things like that you still have to have a fax machine for CRA is pretty antiquated. So it's even simple things that would allow businesses to be able to communicate. And if you do get, and if you're doing electronic communication, you don't have to wait 10 business days to get a response. So these are the types of things that with the processes that are still within government that are still stuck in the 80s and 90s. So.
Would it be, and I'll let you just one follow, would it be easier to do a test drive on one particular department, so to speak, as a best practice, or do across the board kind of a minimum things to be done? I don't know if that has been thought, whether a pilot project that would especially move the digital age. And I'll let you, Mr. Greer, speak.
I was going to say, I think CRA is probably the best department. And to be fair, they are trying new things. They've created My Business Account, which is an online portal for businesses to use, which we're pushing them more and more to use, and allows them to electronically communicate with government through that means. So I only touch on them because they're the biggest impact across. So I think they're the department, and to be fair, they are trying new things, and so we try to work with them and encourage them. They've tried apps as well, which haven't really worked, but that kind of thing. So, but I think continuing to be innovative in that regard is an important piece of how government can better service small business owners, because they work on their phones now. They don't work at computer desks anymore. They're working on their smartphones.
I would just add, it's perplexing to so many companies why, when they're providing information to the government, that they need to have 12 different logins for 12 different websites for different departments.
Okay. Yeah.
With different passwords for each one. Some of those remember who they are when they sign in. Other ones, they need to refill the same information every single time. There's not tombstone data. I know there's a lot of tricky aspects to the federal government's own ability to share information within itself. But it's very challenging when you're dealing with the government. The fact that you're actually just dealing with dozens of different entities, all of whom communicate with you and interact with you in different ways, which causes a lot of headaches.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd actually like to ask a question here. On page 7, which federal government regulations are most burdensome to you? The fourth line down is the record of employment. I know that the CRA has now, basically you do these online. You don't have to do them by hand anymore. How do you see that? Do you see that as reducing the burden, or because they have to get done some way or another? So is that an innovation that you see that has happened?
Yes, it is, except to actually get into the system, you had to go through quite a lengthy process to actually get a password to get into the system. So there was that hurdle to come over. They've recently changed that to make it a little bit easier so they can email you a password to go through. So it's definitely an improvement because it's now electronic and there's no paper. But the process is still the same. And there's still the question of why are we producing 8 million of these per year when only about 1 million are actually needed, because not everybody who gets an ROE is going to go on employment insurance, which is ultimately what it's for, right? So there's all kinds of things. I think it's one of those areas that we need to rethink about, is this process still the best process for what we need it for? And so we have lots of questions around that as well. Then we're trying to work with ESDC to make some adjustments there.
Okay. I do know that there is the push to get the one code, which gets you into all the services. And as a small business owner myself, I felt the frustration of that. But being able to access those services online has certainly made things a lot easier if you have the right code. Okay, thank you. We only got some questions left on this side, so we're going to start with Mr. Longfield.
Thanks. How much time?
You got 7 minutes.
Okay, great, thanks. And thanks for your testimony. I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Sheehan as well. It's good to see the CFIB and the Canadian Chamber both working on the same issue and having a lot of commonality between the two organizations. Sometimes that isn't the case, having worked in the network as much as I have, but it's good to see you working together on this. I'm really interested in the process piece. And the examples you've just given us seem like examples that would be very good in a report going back to the CRA to say, give us tombstone data. I mean, worst part of running a business for me was the paperwork. And worst part of being an MP is the paperwork. I don't like paperwork, and I'm not good at paperwork, and that's probably why I don't like it. So to make it simple for us, for business, ideas like that to implement maybe to a testing ground, because we don't want to go full off and then do something that's going to make things worse. Having some kind of a sandbox or some kind of a test group to run new ideas past. Is that something that your organizations have advocated for, considered, would think it was a good idea?
Yes, we've long sort of pitched that you need to have you need to try new things. You need to, whether it's risk-based, outcome-based, regulatory sandboxes, iterative sort of processes. Those are important to try to find out what works. And departments try sometimes to do that, but they're incredibly risk averse. And why risk a knock on the door from the Auditor General when you can just layer on an extra 2 or 3 layers of red tape for the end user? And so, a lot of the time, some of those attempts aren't always successful in the federal government actually itself assuming some risk in trying something new that perhaps they may need to adjust, that you may not get the outcome that you hope, or that you may need to narrow your focus on the bad actors. So part of that requires governments themselves to change some of their thinking in terms of how they will actually accept the risk to actually try something new that isn't just a different approach to layering on different kinds of burden.
I'll just add that pilot projects have a tendency in the federal government to sometimes go on and on and on. And that's the other thing, is that, you need to do it for your 2 or 3 year period, assess it, and make a determination, continue it or cut it off. And unfortunately, that doesn't often happen in government. But we're big promoters of trying those things. I'll take an example of another department. The Atlantic Immigration Pilot Project, I think, has been successful. And it's cutting down the red tape for businesses to bring in people from other countries. That kind of thing needs to be encouraged, and that kind of innovation needs to be encouraged. And we try to support those types of initiatives whenever we can.
And that was an innovative member of Parliament, Elena Lockhart, that brought that forward, and now we're looking at it in Northern Canada.
Exactly, the rural affairs.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if we looked at guiding principles, the Conservative members here have mentioned pricing pollution. They use different words than we do, but we're looking at how do we reduce the impact of pollution. You need regulations around that. There's social impact as well when we're consulting on pipelines. We're working out our relationship with Indigenous people, including the non-elected Indigenous people that were missed in the first round of a consultation. So the consultative process, making sure that you have the right social and environmental impacts as well as economic impacts, have to be part of regulations. We can't avoid those other two. We'd like to focus on profit all the time, but really we have to look at the others as well.
I think that's very true, but I think that one of the challenges in these processes is time. And for any business, and I think this is a big gap between government and businesses, time is money. And so it's the uncertainty. I don't think the optimal answer to every project is yes, but it's not no either. And it's certainly the amount of time it takes, I think, could be reduced while still maintaining the some of the consultation, the important consultation pieces you're talking about.
Great, thank you. I've taken up Mr. Sheehan's time.
We got 3 minutes.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You had 7, not 5.
Thank you. Oh, that's right. Thank you both.
Thank you. My question is for Ryan, and thanks again to the Chamber for presenting. And in the fall economic statement, the mini budget, if you will, the Chamber response was that it was pleased, for lack of better terms, that much of the what was in your report that you referenced, death by 130,000 cuts, were in there. Could you please, explain to the committee which of those recommendations you thought were the most important, or to just expand on the recommendations into itself in the fall economic statement?
Sure. First, I think Minister Bryson and Treasury Board deserve some credit, a tremendous amount of credit for what was in the fall economic statement and their work to get that in there. But now it sort of all comes down to implementation. promises, and now it's seeing how these are fulfilled, and some of these we think can be real game changers. I mentioned in my remarks, I think the biggest one is giving economic growth and competitiveness mandates to all regulators. Our members every day are contending with regulators who, no matter what evidence or costs they're presented with from companies or members, will say, our job isn't to do that. Our job is only focused on this, and they're not trying to achieve both that protection and prosperity in their mandate. So if that commitment is implemented in a way that actually adjusts proportionality, adjusts some of the ways that regulators think and help sort of endeavor all regulators to try to promote economic growth, then that could be the biggest game changer. That was inspired by our ask for that, and the department's thinking was the UK implemented something similar, a growth duty, for the same reasons that we were asking for this, that too many regulators were not being proportionate and not considering business impacts in their activity. Now, the flip side of that is if a lot of departments and regulators see it as a symbolic commitment, it's legislated, and they go, we already do a cost-benefit analysis, that determines what we, why we go a certain approach, and this won't change the way we do business, then, we may not get much out of that. So we think that's big, along with the CFIB talking about a business-facing group that can propose simplifications. I mentioned in my remarks, again, implementation here is key. The Danish Business Authority does the comply or explain, which we really like, which too often governments will commission expert reports or committee reports, and then they cherry pick the things that most closely align with their existing priorities. A comply or explains mean either you do it or you tell us publicly why you won't. So we like that. We think those are two of the biggest. I know Minister Bryson was particularly fond of an annual modernization bill. That can be useful. Again, it depends on what processes feed into that. How will that interact with a one-for-one? Will departments be incentivized to hold back regulations from that so they can account for their one-for-one, or how will they be reconciled? But there's enough measures in there that if they're implemented correctly, they could be real difference makers. So now for us, it's about seeing how Treasury Board and how regulators themselves will implement those commitments.
Thank you. Then we have Mr. Bayless and then Ms. Cesar Chavan.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions, and then I want to drop into your list of recommendations. You'd mentioned, Mr. Greer, the fact that you have to input over and over data. Are you familiar with Estonia's digital government model? They have a rule. They're the most advanced in the world in digital government. They have a rule, for example, that you only can ask the question once. So you can't re-ask the same question. If you ask me ABC, it's somewhere in our system. No other department has the right to ask that. Would that address something like you're mentioning there?
Certainly, the idea that if you provide information at one time to the government, that they're not going to ask you for that information until it needs to be updated, seems like an ideal endpoint. The size of our federal government, the challenges implementing large IT transformations, privacy and data issues between departments makes all of that very difficult. But that principle of less touch points and common usage of information that is fairly standard is I would say, a desirable endpoint.
It's
yes.
a foundation. What they've built their digital government on is not that you're not allowed to double ask. The recommendations here, and there's another point before I got to you'd made, I think, Mr. Greer, about the concept of prosperity being not in the mandate. For example, and I've shared this with my colleagues here, if we look at the regulation of drugs, Canada, United States, and Europe, in their mandate is you've got to make sure we're safe, but you've also got to get innovative medicines through. They have that in Europe. They have the word innovation again in the FDA, the Food and Drugs for the United States. You come to Canada, it's just keep us safe. So when you go there and talk, hey, I've got a way to be more prosperity, more innovative, they go, well, good for you. Would that be a good idea if we wrote that into the mandate? And when we talk about physical, like true action to change the regulator's actual mandate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the ongoing Patented Medicines Review Board regulations are a perfect example of this. The department has come out with regulations. They say the objective is to lower drug prices. They say here's the analysis and the underpins that. They went to industry and asked for industry feedback. Industry said, we think there will be negative impacts on employment, innovation, investment. There'll be a lot of problems, we think, in what this will mean for the pharmaceutical industry in Canada. And then the output from the department is, our existing original analysis was right. So somewhere along the way, there's somebody who's not being told we need to sit down with industry and try to come together to determine what the real impacts will be of this, and not pretend that there won't be these impacts just because we have the social objective of trying to lower drug prices. So that's actually a perfect example of why embedding innovation and economic growth mandates will empower, encourage, require those officials to actually sit down and determine the true costs of some of these things.
Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're on an excellent line there, that overall the objective has to be to keep Canadians safe and encourage innovation and prosperity at the same time, and balancing those objectives and finding better ways to do that and create what I think is a culture change that's needed in government along those
So we should
lines.
actually write into the regulator's mandate. It's not just keep us safe, but because at some point, I can give you an example, even I know going back to the drugs, we don't have pediatric formulations in Canada because we're keeping people safe, but reality is we are not keeping our infants safe because people just say take a pill, cut it in 4, and that's good enough because we can't get the pediatric formulations through. So we're not actually, we pretend we're keeping them safe, but we're just keeping things out, which actually are safer in some ways. You'd be happy to see us write in the mandate, drive innovation, to take responsibility for economic growth and innovation.
I was going to say, I think one of the things, I don't want to speak for Laura, but one of the things that we have found where regulatory modernization has been the most effective is political leadership. So if the political leadership writes into the mandate of the officials that they must do this and then keeps them to that, that is the most effective way to get change when it comes to regulation. It has to come from the political level.
So let's look at the other recommendations for changing the regulators again. You've come up with one, 25% reduction in 3 years. You'd like that to be mandated by department, including CRA, I suppose?
I'd like that to see that across government, and that it be reported by department. So it would start with a simple count.
Each department would have this objective, or the government as a whole?
Well, the government as a whole, you could do it either way. You could do it, the government as a whole, and then each department has to hit the 25%, or you could have some horse trading within the 25% where it makes sense.
Cap and trade.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it may be harder for some departments to get to 25%, and for others, that may be just a very easy target. So that would be fine. But the important thing is 25% of what? And 25% of a very comprehensive measure that can't be gamed. So,
and you mentioned BC and
I would look at
province?
BC and Manitoba would be the
BC
two
and
I
Manitoba.
would look at.
That have done this very well. And that, as you mentioned before, that's been reflected in your surveys too, as the reduction, if I understand, the reduction of...
Yeah, we have less concern about the regulatory burden in BC than we have in most other provinces. That's going to go up and down depending on the government, but that's certainly been where we've been at.
And you're 1 for 1 and moving on to 1 for 2. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, what you'd like to see specifically?
Yeah, so, I think the most successful approach to this has been in British Columbia, where they had 2 for 1 between 2001 and 2004. They cut by 36%. But what that did is that created a culture change. There was no longer any need, after 2 for 1 hit the 36% reduction, regulators just had to do 1 for 1 after that. But I said they're down to 49%. So there's no bigger indication to me that you've got a culture change within government. The government is still continues to identify
They did 2
more
for 1,
to
then they moved
reduce.
to 1 for 1, but they kept going down, you're saying.
But they kept going down. So think about what that means. In most cases, regulators are continuing to pile on the rules. In British Columbia, they have continued to find things to cut faster than they are adding. And it doesn't mean they're not adding. They are adding. But they've continued to do that. I think that's a very powerful statement about a culture change within government.
Thank you, Chair.
Finally, Ms. Cesar Chavin.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Greer, you mentioned at the beginning, or when there was a question around the price on pollution, that the chamber had been advocating for that since 2011. And I suspect that's because there is some advantages for businesses to be a part of that green economy, right?
Yeah, I mean, principally, if you're going to impose costs on companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, carbon pricing is an efficient way to do it. But we've always said that that needs to be accompanied by a reduction in the regulatory burden and regulatory controls that are placed on those companies if those are determined to be less efficient way
Would
to do
that
so.
25% be what you're looking for then?
We don't have there's no sort of target associated with
So the
carbon pricing
450
specifically.
federal rules that were reduced earlier, is that part of what you're looking for the government to do?
I mean, it's challenging because, at the same time as there's other rules being amended, issues such as the Clean Fuel Standard, new methane regulations, which will impose very high costs on members and sort of life cycle accounting of fuel. There's a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty, and so a lot of the focus has been on trying to understand what those costs will be in addition to carbon pricing.
Okay, so I just want to put on the record a number of the initiatives that we've done for businesses, like allowing them to immediately write off the full cost of machinery and equipment used for manufacturing, allowing businesses to write off immediately the full cost of specified clean energy equipment, again, reducing those 450 federal rules that impose administrative burdens. There's a number of initiatives that have been getting credit card companies to lower fees, et cetera. Of course, our free trade agreements. So there's a number of initiatives. I just want to get on the record. Are we not doing a good job of communicating that out? I heard that perhaps that is not getting communicated. How are these sort of counteracting, as you put it, the cost and the burden balance between the price on pollution, knowing that we need to go there, everybody's advocating for it, and these initiatives that we're taking to help small businesses grow?
A couple of things. I mean, first, I think this goes to, as Laura was discussing, in terms of regulation in, regulation out, without an accurate measure, it's incredibly difficult to determine where and how we're trending, other than what we hear anecdotally from our members or through surveys such as what the CFIB does. So one way to actually get a true picture of that is understanding it. But in a complex operating environment, you're seeing a burden reduced in one area, but at the other side, you're trying to understand what new costs will be that are imposed through any number of different regulatory initiatives that are underway in multiple different departments at different levels of government. It's a lot for companies, and they feel sometimes besieged because it's hard to, especially smaller members, to weigh into those regulatory exercises, to let the department know that although the new initiative may seem innocuous in and of itself, it's the ton of feathers problem that's being layered on top of all these other ones that exist. So for us, the big piece around determining how good a government is doing would be setting a measure that makes them publicly accountable, and so departments and the government itself can understand what progress they're making.
Yeah. I'm good, Mr. Chair.
You have about 1 minute. Who's not going to be here?
I have 1 minute.
Oh, what time is it?
Does anybody else have any other questions? I'm cool with my questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to look at the CRA specifically as low-hanging fruit, if we could say that. What would be if you were in charge of CRA for a couple of years, how would you handle dealing with all those issues that we saw there? What would be the low-hanging fruit of CRA?
It's funny, as to prepare for this, CFIB has a counseling service that we have counselors across the country respond to inquiries from our members, and we do about 36,000 calls a year, and CRA is probably 1 in 4 of those calls. So I had my colleague put together a list of specific examples, which I have here. CRA is probably 2/3 of the list, and so it isn't about 1 or 2 small things. It's many different areas that need to be looked at. And it can start with as simple as better customer service, plain language on the website, clarity around what constitutes compliance, those kinds of things when it comes to CRA. Yes, we could potentially also simplify the rules and reduce the rules, but often with CRA, it's communication. It's better ability for a business owner to get the answers that they need. It's up to them. They'll call CRA. They may be on hold for a while, though they've just improved the system there. They get an answer, but there's no guarantee it's the right answer. They apply that, they're still in trouble. It's those kinds of things, right? So it's really about simple, plain language. We get letters our members send to us that they get from CRA that we cannot understand what they're telling the business owner to do. So plain language, much more easy communication, ability to go to them beyond just a phone call. Those are all things I think CRA, if advanced in those areas, would actually probably reduce some of the burden by 25-30%, just doing that.
I would just add, in agreement with all of those, the Chamber's releasing a report next week on the need to modernize our tax system. I think simplifying and modernizing the tax system itself would be a big help. You know, one of the other things we're going to recommend in that report is that providing small companies with a specialized case officer to assist them with their unique issues would be helpful, because you have too many small businesses that often have to spend limited resources on tax accountants and lawyers to resolve sort of some of these unique issues. And you know, sometimes it sounds like defeat that we need to come up with these new concierge services to navigate the complexities. But doing that combined with actually trying to make the system simpler themselves would go a long way.
Thank you. I do have another question, and then we're done. BC, my hometown, has been brought up quite numerous times on the work that they've done in cutting regulation and so on and so forth. Who would you recommend that we bring in that could actually give us a lot more in-depth information on this?
There are a number of people you could talk to in British Columbia, but I think the Assistant Deputy Minister, Christine Little, would be a good person to bring in. And she's got a number of good staff. And then there are ones, I mean, those are current staff. They're also staff who were there closer to the beginning when they set up the model. That might be useful as well, because there's been some change and there were some challenges at the beginning that are different from the challenges that they have today. But I think it would be very good to hear from some of the people in government who are responsible, because they'll tell you about the culture change that I'm talking about and how empowering it's been for them to get rewarded for making life easier for citizens, not just businesses, by the way. And I think that's an artificial distinction. I really think whatever you do in this space, you should go broad. There were a number of changes, and I've changed my own thinking around this, actually. I used to say, oh, it's just a small business issue. But a number of things they've done in British Columbia. One of the things they recently did is streamline, get rid of a lot of the red tape around what happens when a loved one dies and all the reporting you have to do. Now, that's something that everybody's heads can nod around, and whether you're a business, it affects you if you're a business owner, for sure. A lot of businesses are family businesses, but it affects all citizens. It's really about improving the relationship between government and the citizens it serves, and I think it would be great to bring some of them in.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses today. Before everybody goes, we just have to pass a study budget, but so everybody stay in your seats. Thank you very much for coming, and we're looking forward to continuing this study. Thank you. Mr. Sheehan, you have a motion for us?
A good segue to the budget. I'd like to propose the following. A budget in the amount of $13,800 for the study of the impact of Canada's regulatory structure on small business.
It was all emailed to you. Any debate? All those in favor? So done. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned for the day.